Do you really think a company would hire the child of a poor single mother like you? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, but during my final interview, the notorious demon instructor said this to me. It was clear he looked down on me for coming from a single mother household and had no intention of hiring me. I struggled to keep my composure as the interview worsened. Reaching my limit, I took out my phone and called my father. You see, my father is actually the president of the bank. My name is Emma Miller. I'm a 23-year-old college senior searching for a job. My parents divorced last year, making my mom a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives, so I naturally stayed with my mom. Despite the divorce, my future plans were heavily influenced by my father, the CEO of the largest bank in the country. I admired him and aspired to work at his bank. Tomorrow, I have my final interview. I'm not the best student, and when I shared my goal of working at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to dissuade me, but also ridiculed me. I thought the ordeal would end after the interview, but looking back, it was truly awful. One day during my college years, a friend named Julia asked, "Hey Emma, have you decided where you're going after graduation?" For me, there's only one choice. The bank, I replied confidently. But our conversation drew murmurs from those around us. Just as I wondered if I had said something strange, Julia spoke up again. "Emma, it's hard to say, but you should know your place." To my shock, someone I considered a friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back, another classmate chimed in. "It's impossible for you. That bank is the largest in the country and the hardest to get into from this university. Only one person from here has been hired in the past 10 years. I knew that, of course. I hadn't told anyone that my father was the bank's CEO. If I did, people would assume I got in through nepotism, which would tarnish my father's reputation and make me feel inadequate. I hated being misunderstood and judged unfairly. "Emma, I'm saying this for your own good," Julia continued, but I cut her off. "I don't need your advice." Everyone's eyes were on me, their cold stares piercing my heart. Why do I have to hear this? I thought, as our teacher, noticing the commotion, approached. "What's going on here?" she asked. "Miller says she wants to work at North Trust Bank," the boy answered. The teacher's face tensed up. "Are you taking society for granted?" Even the teacher, who was supposed to support students, denied my dream. There was no one to stand up for me. "Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that?" I retorted, determined to defend my ambition. I objected, but the teacher continued, piling on more criticism. "You're naive," she said. "My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They call him a demon interviewer," she added with a smug look. The teacher's surname was Anderson, a 29-year-old woman. If I encountered an interviewer with the same surname at North Trust Bank, it would likely be her father, a demon interviewer indeed. "Yes, that's right," she continued. "My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. "Is that at the Sun Plaza branch?" I asked, curious about the connection. "Yes," she replied, "and you're from a single mother household, right?" I wondered why she would ask that, but answered honestly, "Yes." Then the teacher showed a sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. From that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Julia, whom I thought was a close friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves. It was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions worsened with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank hiring process had 4 stages. A written test in the first stage, followed by 2 interviews with people from the head office for the second and third stages. The fourth and final stage was an interview with the hiring manager for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager, in other words, the highest-ranking hiring manager. I wanted to work at the Sun Plaza branch and had managed to pass the third stage. "How did you pass the third stage?" they asked, now surprised and anxious about my progress. Most of them had failed their desired company's second stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began, and in my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus solely on myself. My motivation was to get an offer from North Trust Bank. My mind was set on that goal. One day, after class, Teacher Anderson started attacking me in front of everyone. "All right, everyone, listen up," she shouted to the students preparing to leave. Everyone turned around, curious about what was happening. "Emma Miller has cleared the third round of North Trust Bank's exams," she announced. The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy, but with her next statement, everyone seemed to catch their breath. "But it seems she'll fail the fourth round." "Huh? What do you mean?" I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. "The interviewer for the fourth round has been decided. It's my father, the demon instructor Anderson." The surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. "Serves you right. Know your place. Good." The classroom filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends had turned their backs on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way for them to relieve the stress of job hunting. But it was different. I realized the situation around me was rooted in jealousy. They were envious of me for challenging something they wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her who isn't even good at studying. There's no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Miller is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult. It's the most challenging. It's impossible. So why is Miller trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange. The reality became apparent as job hunting progressed. Among those who passed, those who failed, and various others, no one here had much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, especially since her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her lead. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother gently encouraged me. Wrapped in her warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. "Don't forget, just do your best," my mother said as I left the house. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. Initially, there had been nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would be selected from this group. Just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate, my name was called. "Please come in." "Hello, thank you," I greeted as my final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. Anderson, the teacher's father, just as she had said, a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer, about 10 years younger than my father, and a man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, sitting at a slight distance with a computer. The interview began with typical questions from Anderson, starting with a self-introduction and my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. Then, the complaints started suddenly. "I don't really like female bank employees," Anderson said. Not knowing what to say, I fell silent. "Because they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea," he continued. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me, just like a man. I tried to appeal, responding flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far, yet the chief hiring officer, who should have been higher ranking than Anderson, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Anderson. Maybe Anderson was pressuring him too. That's what I thought, but there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Anderson spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. "You seem to come from a single mother household, am I wrong?" he asked, probably looking at the documents I submitted from the university. They included my address and family composition. "Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother," I replied. As soon as he heard my words, Anderson began to laugh, his sinister smile echoing through the room. "I see you're from a single mother household. What business does a poor person have here?" He blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I began to sweat. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious, but it was Anderson who started talking first. Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you? He mocked. Huh? Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired. You're going to assume I'm poor. I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Anderson reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer? I was frustrated but couldn't say anything back. This was the bank my father worked at, the one I had always admired. I didn't want to lose because of this one man, but I didn't know what to say in return. Why don't you say something? Anderson further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly, and I became incredibly calm to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. Understood, I said. Anderson seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up? He asked. Finally, another person spoke. Have you been sitting the whole time? You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do? I know about you because I've heard from my daughter, Anderson said, revealing that the teacher had shared information about me. Is this not a leak of information? I thought, but it didn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. What are you doing? Making a phone call? Are you mocking this interview? Stop it now, or I'll reject you right here. Anderson threatened me, but I wasn't fazed at all. I spoke into the phone. Hello, Dad. Your father is here. What can a person from a single-parent family do, clinging to their separated father? Was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Anderson. Hey, Dad, can you come to the interview room now? Of course, he agreed. I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me, okay? My father said before I hung up the phone. The person in charge of the recording stared at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. But of course, the one who reacted the most was Anderson. Pointing at me, he said, You're finished. Making a phone call during an interview? Unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something. I finally decided to argue back. I couldn't take it anymore. This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Anderson. The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had stood up to this man's abusive behavior until now. The recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Anderson to be punished? Anderson slammed his right hand on the table with all his might, a loud thud echoing throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. Brian Wilson, you know him, right? I asked. For a moment, Anderson looked as if I had hit a nerve. He immediately countered, Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank. To Anderson, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added, So if my last name was Wilson until recently, would you think it's a coincidence? Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Anderson then stood up from his chair and muttered, What did you say? His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. Emma Wilson, that was my full name until recently. My father is Brian Wilson, the president of the bank, 63-year-old Brian Wilson. You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening. Anderson let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview. At that moment, my father entered the room. As the door opened, he said words that echoed my own feelings. This is hardly an interview at all. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your hard work, the two men said, standing up to greet my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt the extraordinary presence he commanded. The president of the bank stood before us, and Anderson's face turned pale. His mouth hung open in shock. My father then spoke to him. Hey, Anderson, what were you doing to my daughter, huh? My father was a big man who had practiced judo. With his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep, resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening, even the once confident Anderson. "Why, yes, sir," Anderson squeaked out, unable to maintain his composure. "I don't want to hear your excuses." My father cut him off. He then turned to the man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. It was the first time I learned his name, Green, from the nameplate that had been bent and hard to read. "Green, aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now?" My father demanded. I'm very sorry, Green replied, bending at a 90-degree angle and bowing. The young clerk in the room looked terrified, even though he had done nothing wrong. He was drenched in sweat. Hey, clerk, what's your name? My father called out in a gentle voice, which only made it more terrifying. My name is Harris. Mr. Harris, can you send today's interview record to my PC? You're also recording the audio, right? My father asked. I later learned that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed, but also recorded as a backup. Thanks to that, Anderson's misconduct was exposed, and he was punished. Anderson was trembling, like a frog stared down by a snake. Hey, Anderson. Yes, what is it? Anderson stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He was a completely different person from earlier. Apologize to my daughter. It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank, my father commanded. At my father's words, Anderson bowed deeply and apologized. Sorry. But I couldn't forgive him, even after seeing that. Dad, I can't forgive him, I said firmly. When I murmured, weakly, my father nodded in understanding. Walking up to Anderson, he seemed like a lion about to hunt a small animal. Do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this, Anderson? My father's pressure made Anderson freeze. You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her? No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Anderson began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. At least over 100 people, he admitted. I was shocked to hear that he had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful, even though it was my father's company. Hey, Green, my father called out. Yes, I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this. So I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Anderson, I'll never forgive you. Anderson gasped, frightened. My father continued, I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right? Hearing this, Anderson collapsed on the spot as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe. And so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Anderson were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned, and Anderson was sued by the company and the victims group. Anderson, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, the teacher with a forced smile congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. Miss Anderson, this is Brian Wilson, the president of North Trust Bank, the principal introduced. Oh yes, Miss Anderson replied, her expression faltering. I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is, Emma Miller's father. What? What did you say? I added to the surprise of the teacher's words. He's my mother's ex-husband and my father. My words caused a stir in the class. Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they'd have been friendlier to me. Miss Miller's father is the president of North Trust Bank, the teacher said upon learning the truth, becoming an empty shell. The principal then addressed the teacher. This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Wilson's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Wilson's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you? Well, that is never mind the excuses. Tell me only the truth. Is it a fact? Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, yes. Mr. Wilson wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Miller voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue. What will you do? The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teachers seemed to understand as well and ultimately resigned from the school, effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action, one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I have vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary banker like my father. Emily saw it. You know, you were at a restaurant bar planning a trip with another woman. Oh, I see. And so what? Even when caught cheating, my husband Donald wouldn't drop his defiant attitude. In a moment, what we had built over 15 years crumbled away. In this day and age, I was a full-time homemaker, living with his parents just like every other year. I had given up the job I loved at a publishing company where I felt fulfilled, and now I spent half of the week accompanying my parents to the hospital and adjusting meals according to everyone's schedule. I was living a life much like a housemaid. After getting married, I had no time for myself. The only place I could relax was in our bedroom, even in this spacious house. Despite all this, I had chosen this life because I wanted to be with my husband. The option of leaving never crossed my mind, so when my adulterous husband said, "We can get a divorce, you know," I was at a loss for words, feeling more amazed than angry. This is the story of me, Sophie Johnson, turning 40 this year, leaving my husband Donald after 15 years of marriage, and starting my life from scratch. It all began 2 months ago on the 25th. That day was payday for Donald, who worked at an electronics manufacturer. Usually, his salary would be deposited into our joint account. I would use that money to pay our monthly bills and give him an allowance in the evening. However, 2 months ago, his salary wasn't deposited into our joint account. I thought there must have been some technical glitch, so when he got home in the evening, I asked him about it. "What do you mean you changed the deposit account without saying anything to me?" He had switched the account to his personal one. "But what about our payments? These bills are due on the 27th. I couldn't keep up with a sudden change and just thought of immediate concern. "Just let me know how much you need, and I'll transfer that amount into the joint account," he said, taking off his suit with his back turned to me. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes. "So why did you change it?" I couldn't think of any reason. In the 15 years we've been together, we had never changed the account. We were saving in our joint account, so it wouldn't be a problem if his transfer was late. It's not that our bills would fall behind. Maybe I didn't need to press the issue, but I couldn't help wondering. Why didn't he trust me with our finances? Did I do something wrong? I didn't remember overspending, but I thought maybe I had unknowingly upset him. If so, I needed to apologize. That's what I thought when I asked him. But it seems like he thought I was blaming him. He threw his freshly removed shirt onto the couch and glared at me. "It's my hard-earned money, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. But why do I need your permission to use it?" What? I couldn't understand any of his words. I've been giving him a $500 allowance every month, but that was just a temporary arrangement. If his expenses piled up, I would give him more. I asked him what he spent his money on, but I'd never refused to give him more when he needed it. As a stay-at-home wife, there have been times when I asked if I could buy something I wanted, but the reverse never happened. "I don't need dinner today." "What?" "But I already prepared." "Never mind, I'll eat out." He got bent out of shape, grabbed his car keys, and went out again. He seemed strange. For the past 15 years, we've never had issues over money. But suddenly, he starts saying it's his money, while cleaning up the food I had prepared. I was upset at my husband's selfish actions. I was frustrated that despite having food at home, he chose to eat out anyway because now he was in charge of the finances. From that moment, he began eating out every night and coming home late at night after I fell asleep. Also, the number of days he told me he was staying at work overnight increased. The fight had completely escalated. Even when we were together, we didn't talk more than necessary. As time passed, it was hard to find a chance to make up, and I started blaming myself. We'd never had a fight last this long before. It was a minor issue that he changed the bank account without consulting me. If he wants to manage the finances, that's fine. After about 2 weeks of awkwardness, I began to reconsider like that. Then one day, I received a message from Emily, who was my colleague when I worked at the publishing company. "Hey, how are you doing? How about lunch soon?" Emily's message was a welcome surprise. We used to go out for drinks after work and spend our days off together when we were single. Now, with families of our own, we didn't contact each other as much but still tried to meet at least once or twice a year. Her invitation came at a good time, and I agreed readily. 2 days later, in the afternoon, we were sitting in a cafe in the next town. "So they moved into the care facility, huh?" "Yeah, both of them in the same place." Emily asked how things were going, and I told her about my parents-in-law moving into a nursing home a few months ago. "I know I shouldn't say this, but it's a good thing. It must be a relief for you." She looked pleased, knowing how much I had been struggling to find time for myself. She seemed relieved now. "Well, I do have to get their clothes, visit, and accompany them to their doctor's appointments, but still, my life has become a lot easier. This was the first time since I was single that I was able to casually make time to meet with a friend." "You're such a dutiful daughter-in-law. Is Donald still hands-off?" "Yes, he seems to want to do nothing on his days off. He never wanted to go anywhere on his days off. In these 15 years, we've never even gone shopping together. Her husband is diligent. He picks her up in his car when it rains and sometimes even does the shopping for her. He never changed at all. Well, since I am a stay-at-home wife, he could at least take care of his own parents." Emily never thought highly of my husband. When we got married, we both had jobs, but he never helped with the household chores. On days when I was too tired to do housework, he found it unbelievable and suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. I didn't want to quit, but I resigned as he suggested, becoming a full-time homemaker. Soon after, I was asked to live with his parents, and I ended up taking care of them. The reason I couldn't talk back to my husband was because of the significant difference in our incomes. He is 8 years older than me, already held a position at his company, and his income was more than double mine. "Can you earn as much as I do? If you can, I wouldn't mind quitting." He'd say things like that, leaving me speechless. I had discussed my true desire of not wanting to quit my job with Emily, even crying on the phone, overwhelmed by having no time for myself. I understand why she holds a negative view of him. It's because of my venting. After a while, the warm vegetable salad we ordered arrived. As she served it on smaller plates, she spoke again. "So, how are things with him?" Upon being asked, I thought for a while and nodded affirmatively. I had actually come to discuss our big fight, but I didn't want him to be seen in a worse light. Emily paused, holding the serving tongs, and stared at me as I managed only to nod and smile, trying not to arouse suspicion. She stopped serving the salad midway. "I'm sorry I asked it in the wrong way. Sophie, things aren't going well with him, are they?" Emily's words made it seem like she knew something. I was left flustered and unable to respond as she started talking about something that had happened a few days ago. She recounted being at a dining bar near her office for a work after party. While heading to the restroom, she passed a man in the aisle who turned out to be my husband. He didn't seem to recognize her, so she decided against calling out to him. But noticing that he was in casual clothes made her wonder if he was with me. After leaving the restroom, she decided to take a look at where he was seated. What she saw was him having drinks with a woman who wasn't me. It hit me instantly. "He's cheating on you." They were sitting close together, bodies touching as they drank. Was that really my husband? I couldn't believe it. He hadn't come home that day due to working overtime, so there was no reason for him to be in casual clothes. Moreover, he seemed genuinely busy lately. Did he even have the time for cheating in his current state? Although we've been on bad terms recently, I couldn't imagine him resorting to cheating. "I just don't see him as that kind of person." Sensing my thoughts, she sighed and added, "For the upcoming long weekend, he mentioned going to a place in Malibu. He was showing information about the accommodations on his phone and mentioned something about a prime-grade steak dinner. You could probably find the hotel if you search from there." She started searching for the hotel on her phone, while at the cafe I was still hoping it was just her misunderstanding. However, as soon as I got home, I started looking through his clothes. I don't remember how many clothes he has, so I wouldn't know how many of what item were missing, but I did notice that 2 or 3 of his favorite clothes were missing. Until last year, he would immediately wear them after washing, and they were always at the front of the drawer when opened. But now, they were nowhere to be found, even after searching every corner, the back of the closet, and the drawers of rarely used cabinets, literally everywhere. The only thing that came to mind was him working overtime and even on weekends due to his busy schedule. telling me he had spent a night in the company's restroom because he missed the last train. As I stood in front of the closet, the sound of an incoming email came from my pocket. It was a message from Emily. The email included the URL of a hotel in Malibu. As I stood there in a daze, I slowly pressed the link, and a stay plan with a dinner including prime-grade meat was displayed. I felt dizzy, like I was having a bad dream. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe in him, but not finding his favorite shirt was a huge blow. 2 days later, the Saturday before a long weekend, he was unusually at home, working with the TV on. I placed a cup of coffee near his computer and casually asked, I haven't seen you wearing your favorite t-shirt this year. Even though he hadn't taken his eyes off the display when I put down his drink, at this question, the sound of him typing on the keyboard suddenly stopped. Then he said, "Yeah, I'll wear it sometime," making a point of looking at me as he responded. That was unusual. For the past month since that payday, he had been distant, but now, when asked about his shirt, he was making eye contact. I looked for it but couldn't find it, I added, trying to gauge anything from his reaction. He replied, "Isn't it somewhere?" and then looked away, returning to his computer. His reaction made me feel suspicious. Despite mentioning his missing favorite shirt, he showed no signs of being troubled. Normally, in such situations, he would pretend to be troubled just to emphasize that I hadn't taken care of it properly, even if he didn't really need it. Last year, he kept complaining just because it hadn't dried due to the rain. Every change seemed suspicious when it came to him. I couldn't control myself. I had to keep digging until I got clear answers, even if it meant going too far. "You're off for a long weekend, right?" Even though we hadn't reconciled after our last fight, I couldn't help but ask something more intrusive. "Work from when?" "I don't know. There's a business trip. I might have a day off." Was this also a lie? It seemed like it. After all, for the past 15 years, he always took time off during the holidays. Emily's words crossed my mind. Going to Malibu, as she said, mentioned the prime-grade steak. Of course, as she also said, the story I heard at the cafe started to feel real, and I felt a surge of anger welling up within me. Before I realized it, I had said it out loud. "Business trip? You mean you're going to Malibu?" Uttering a word that I hadn't asked about, he who had been looking at the screen froze. He slowly turned around, but his expression had changed from earlier. With a weary face, he squinted and glared at me. It was the exact same look he had during our fight on that payday. What the hell is going on? Really rummaging around our room pretending to look for clothes? He sighed heavily. Hearing his words, my lips quivered noticeably. Indeed, I had rummaged through the room, but I found nothing. I couldn't find the t-shirt. Yet despite that, he said it, rummaged through his room. He said so, which means if I had rummaged more, I would have found something that linked to Malibu. I still wanted to believe even while doubting. Emily says she saw it at the wine bar. You and another woman were planning a trip. The things we had built started to crumble away. Oh, is that so? I thought. At times like this, he would hardly make an excuse, but reality was different. He was not flustered at all. He turned away with a defiant look. So what's the point? I was even questioned in return. What does he want to hear? When I became speechless out of disbelief, he piled on words. Who do you think you are? I'm working hard to earn money, enough for a stay-at-home wife to live comfortably. He yelled at me loudly and my head started to ache. I placed a hand on my forehead and took a deep breath. I'm okay with getting a divorce, He uttered those few words. For the past 15 years, no matter what happened, no matter how hard it was, I had tried not to think about it. I was disappointed that he could say it with no hesitation. From that day, he continued to ignore me. Even worse, the moment he found out I knew it, he boldly started communicating right in front of me, like, "All right, I'll pick you up at 7 in the morning." The first time it happened, I was dumbfounded. Was he always like this? The person in front of me was a total stranger. As the long weekend and the day of his trip approached, I found myself in the car driven by Emily, silently witnessing his infidelity unfold before my eyes. "Sophie, did you get a shot of him putting his arm around her waist just now?" "Yeah. You should take as many photos as you can." "Okay." When I recounted my conversation with him on Saturday to Emily, she was furious and urged me to break up with such a foolish man. She also suggested that I take photos as proof of his cheating and claim for emotional damages. She spent her much-anticipated weekend for this very purpose. The woman he was cheating with was around her late 20s or early 30s, with a slim figure and wearing revealing clothes. Did he have a thing for her long hair? He stroked her hair over and over with a gentle smile on his face. Since he left the house, I promptly followed and watched everything. From when he picked her up from her apartment, even when he stopped by a convenience store to buy breakfast together, to when they started walking arm in arm in front of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Now, they just entered a hotel together. I took pictures of all of it with my phone, but each time I pressed the shutter, I pondered over what I was doing. I knew it, but seeing it with my own eyes made me really sad. But I didn't shed a tear. I just stared at his joyful face. That was my day. What do we do now? Shall we stay somewhere for the night? No, let's head back. It seemed she was planning to stay overnight, but I shook my head. I didn't want to waste the money I've saved by scrimping on such a thing. I thought our life as a couple had finally started after my in-laws had been placed in a nursing home. We hadn't been able to go on trips until now because we always took care of our parents first, but from now on, we wanted to create memories as a couple. The money I had planned to use for those times, I wonder if I just wasted 15 years. If I knew it would turn out like this, I wouldn't have married. If I knew I would go through this, I would have divorced him a long time ago. I shouldn't have had to endure and try so hard. Today, seeing his smile for the first time in a while, I wanted to redo those 15 years, though I wanted to cry. I couldn't help but keep sighing. She had been quietly listening, but suddenly she started the car engine and checked the time. What time is it now? After 3 o'clock. Then she made a call and smiled at me. Hey Sophie, let's move out right now. Ha! Hello, sorry to bother you during the long weekend. I appreciate your help. I was taken aback by her sudden proposal. She seemed determined to start something. Panicked, I shook my head at her while she was on the phone, but she ignored me and continued, saying, "It's all good." From that moment, Emily was full of energy. While driving, she used her car's navigation system to call various places and gather people to come to my house. About 3 hours later, we actually arrived home in the evening. About 2 hours after that, but within just 1 hour, all my belongings in the house were packed into cardboard boxes. It was truly unbelievable. I didn't want to talk about work since you didn't want to quit, Sophie, but I've transferred from a fashion magazine and now I'm the editor-in-chief of a local magazine. In the car, she made various calls to the moving company, real estate agency, and even to a lawyer who knows Donald. She expertly adjusted the schedule so that the Certus people's visiting times did not clash. I followed her instructions meticulously. Minute by minute, I packed only my valuables into a box, leaving the rest to be handled by the movers. The real estate agent introduced me to a house that could be moved into within a few days. Meanwhile, my belongings were sent to her house, and I ended up staying with her for a few days. After the truck packed with my things left, I was visited by a lawyer who provided advice on claiming alimony after divorce, guiding me towards the least burdensome method. I was amazed at how much could be accomplished in just a few hours. I knew she was a very proactive person from our time working together, but her efficiency was truly remarkable. However, as I looked around the now half-empty room, anxiety slowly began to creep in. He's definitely going to be mad. The cost of moving was surprisingly low. The studio apartment was affordable, and even the consultation with the lawyer was free, yet it still required money. I made these decisions without consulting him. I'm sure he'll be furious when he gets back from his trip. As I felt our relationship deteriorating rapidly, I became depressed. Then she slapped my back. Hey, being a homemaker is a respectable job too. The money you've saved from being frugal is also yours. Plus, it's his fault. He said he'd transfer the necessary money, right? So let's have him pay even for the cost of living on your own. After being strongly persuaded by her, I took one last look around the house. I remembered how in the early days I had found it difficult to rearrange things. Now, I realized I had placed my toner on the bathroom vanity without hesitation. The shoe rack was filled with my shoes. I had always seen myself as a maid, but maybe I had actually become part of the family. After imprinting the image of the home I had lived in for 15 years in my mind, I made up my mind and nodded vigorously at her. Then, on the last day of the long weekend, I left the house I had shared with him. I was still staying at Emily's place. "Where are you at?" I picked up the call from him with a trembling hand. He asked that with a grumpy voice. Without answering his question, I said the words Emily and I had decided on beforehand. "You said you were okay with a divorce, right? And that you would transfer the necessary money. I am divorcing you. Please provide for the costs of me living alone." "What? Stop talking nonsense and come back." He seemed to think this was just a runaway. I cut off his voice and spoke my final words. Please have your new partner take care of your parents from now on. Thank you for 15 years. While he was still talking, I hung up. He called back several times, but I didn't pick up. I did feel guilty about how I ended things unilaterally like this, but looking back, I had always accepted his unilateral demands ever since we got married. So I tried to think it is fine, at least in the last moment. The following year was a whirlwind. I negotiated with him through a lawyer and finally secured a divorce with alimony and living expenses assured. Finding peace of mind was a struggle until I landed a job as an office clerk at a local factory, slowly building my life with my monthly salary. Sophie, can you make the deadline this month? Yeah, I'll make it, but I think I'm going to barely make it by the deadline, so I don't have time to chat on the phone. All right, I'll go now. You have your piece this month too. 6 months ago, Emily, who manages our local magazine, added a new section about saving money, and as a frugal person, I've been given a chance to write a couple of pages there every month. I gave up on my dream to work in a publishing company. Her arrangements mean a lot to me. Now I'm a writer, but I have 15 years of experience in budgeting as a homemaker, and I want to share my experiences wholeheartedly. I was able to make a fresh start. Then an unexpected call came in. It's good to hear your voice. Sounds well. Mother-in-law. My mother-in-law called me from her nursing home. I had said my goodbyes to her before my divorce, but in that time, I couldn't talk with her well. I hadn't contacted her since the last time, so I was surprised that she called. After talking about my father-in-law's advanced dementia, she updated me on my ex-husband's situation. What? He broke up? Yes, that's the case. He's foolish, isn't he? Between us, he was dumped before the divorce was finalized. I see. Seems like his relationship with that woman has already ended. Well, that's expected, isn't it? Any young girl would run if she had to deal with taking care of seniors. So who is at the home now? Donald. He ended up leaving his big corporate job, but he's trying with his complaints. He's such a fool. He was able to work because of his wife supporting him behind. He still doesn't talk about his own infidelity. Sophie, breaking up with him was the right thing to do. My ex-husband hasn't changed, but it seems like he's struggling a bit. I found myself a bit relieved by hearing that. My usually stern mother-in-law chuckled and said, Sophie, thank you. I was planning to ask you to try again with him when I called. But your voice sounds so lively, so I decided not to ask. In the roughly 15 years we lived together, I'd never had such a long conversation like this with my mother-in-law. Our relationship wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. I listened to her voice. I assumed this would be the last time I'd hear from her, and I savored every word. It turned out for the best, she said so sadly, and my tears welled up. It's been a year since my divorce. Everything has been going well, and I've managed to make a fresh start. However, I've always felt a lingering sense of regret. It's because I felt that I had wasted 15 years of my life. But then, with this phone call, my mother-in-law said it, thank you, and that she had planned to ask me to try again with her son. There's no chance of getting back together with my ex-husband, but hearing that from his mother made me genuinely happy. It felt like a validation of what I had done for those 15 years. I will never forget this phone call from her. Those 15 years were not wasted because